So here we have the reflection that I've created for the Technology and Universal Design class. Um, my reflection is looking at how I implement universal design in my English class at Gulf University for Science and Technology in the state of Kuwait in the Middle East, where all of my students are learning English as a second language. They have matriculated through government school where English is taught as a topic, not as a skill. And so when they first come to the university, most of the students have a lack of skills in reading, writing, speaking, listening, vocabulary, and spelling. And so the purpose of our foundation program is to act as a bridge between high school and university to help them prepare and strengthen their English knowledge and skills so that they can become ready for undergraduate English. So this is an examination of the three important ideas, which I've taken directly from the Universal Design for Learning strategies. And so I'm going to be breaking down how I'm using recognition networks, strategic networks, and affective networks in my English 098 class. So for recognition networks, Grace Rubenstein said that it's important to deliver instruction through multiple forms of media. And so the first way that I implement that is by making audio files available to my students. Whatever we have in text, we also have audio files available. And so an example of how I've incorporated that into my class is our novel for this semester was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And students had 24-hour access to the book, but they also had access to audio files for every chapter in the book. And what I did was I found an audio book of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory on YouTube, and I trimmed that down to chapter by chapter audio files using Clip Converter. And so by listening to the audio files that are available instead of me reading out loud to them, which is very boring, they're not only having the opportunity to be more engaged in what they're reading, but they can hear the inflection, the intonation, the changes in pitch, the use of punctuation for added expression, and they're being exposed to multiple accents in the process. For example, the speaker, the narrator for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory has a British accent, whereas I obviously have an American accent.
1. Here comes Charlie. There are 4 very old people in this story. Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine are the father and mother of Mr. Bucket.
And so whenever they have a chapter assigned to them, they have the option of listening to the audio as well. I do not require it, but it is there for them to help them along the way. The second thing that I use for recognition networks is links to related information. And I try to make these available as often as possible, simply so that the students can have resources to them. So one example of how I do this is when we have tasks and forms to complete. If there is information that they can get from another site, another source, I make that link available to them. This was an anticipatory set, really to build background knowledge on architectural terms and different skyscrapers around the world, but also to access prior knowledge, because one of the skyscrapers that the students were researching is the Burj Khalifa, which is right next door to us in Dubai. And the vast majority of my students have been there. And even if they haven't been there, they know of its existence. And so tapping into what it is that they already know by providing links to related information is definitely important for engaging them and increasing their success. The third thing that I do that is part of the recognition networks in my class is color highlighting in word processing. And I do this because a great majority of my students are visual learners. And by color coding things, I can help them access that information in a visual way instead of just saying, oh, well, you need to put your thesis statement at the end of your paragraph. They know by the time they finish my class, at least, but hopefully before then, they know that thesis statements are always going to be yellow. And so you'll see that in play in this student sample, which I provide the students when they're composing their comparison contrast essay. So I give them the outline and color code everything in the outline, but then those colors are also available to them in the actual essay. And so here's what I meant by thesis statements are always yellow. So those are just some examples of how I am incorporating recognition networks into my 098 class. And the last part is multimedia glossary. And what you're going to see here is an Edpuzzle that I made for my students to introduce them to vocabulary for our upcoming unit on economics. And Edpuzzle, if you're not familiar with it, it's a great resource for showing videos to the students, but making them accountable for the information that's in the video and also helping them to really attend to specific information in the video. So instead of just filling out a worksheet as they're watching something up on the screen, this actually pauses and has them answer questions or has them link to other specific details while they are watching. So here we have Edpuzzle.
So let's start with the basics. What is economics? Well, it might be easy to determine what economics isn't. Economics is not the study of money or getting rich, although understanding economics can help with that. Economics is not the study of the stock market. It's just not. And economics is not primarily about men in bow ties forecasting what will happen in a given market or the overall economy. Actually, a few economists do that, but that's not the main focus of economics. Economics is the study of people and choices. The famous economist Alfred Marshall defined economics as a study of man and woman in the ordinary business of life. It inquires how he gets his income and how he uses it. Thus, it is on the one side the study of wealth, and the other, more important side, a part of the study of man and woman.
And so the video pauses for the question, and I embed links to your dictionary specifically because I really like how your dictionary phrases their definitions in simple, easy to understand definitions. They also provide the student with tools to help them understand the words better. They've got synonyms, sentence examples, quotes, biographies, grammar-related articles, and all sorts of other education resources. So the task that the students needed to complete was to look up the word economics in your dictionary and read the definition and paraphrase that definition for themselves. Your dictionary also provides
Economics
pronunciation for the students so that they're able to grow their vocabulary and understand how to pronounce these things. So when they've completed their Edpuzzle, when they've completed looking up that definition, they need to write their own definition of that particular word. And if they copy paste, then it is counted wrong. So that is what we have for recognition networks. The second major idea, the second important idea for universal design is your strategic networks. So this is how students are supposed to go about doing things or thinking about things. Carol Ann Tomlinson and I can't remember her first name, Imbo, said, what we ask students to do in the name of learning or practice should help them own the content, make that content their own, and see how it makes sense and realize how it is useful. And so that's all about the strategies of learning, the strategies of approaching the content. And so one of the things that I incorporate into my class is process modeling. Writing essays, learning how to write essays is hugely important in English 098 because when they get to English 100, they're expected to do pretty much nothing but write academic essays. And so here's a video of how that works in English 098. So this will be an example of how the students in my English 098 class are coached through the writing process for a comparison contrast essay looking at the similarities and differences between a novel and the film adaptation of that novel. So if you can't tell by the picture, this is for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl, with of course the film adaptation directed by Tim Burton. So after we've gone through the entire novel and looked at each specific chapter, we get to the point where they need to prep for writing the essay. Their introduction needs to include a quote, the copyright information for the novel, a synopsis of the novel, the copyright information for the film, and a thesis statement that is following the comparison contrast format. And so at certain points, they're given specific examples to help them along the way. So here we've got an example of between the novel and the 1998 film Les Miserables, starring Liam Neeson and directed by Billy August. There are a lot of similarities and differences. Now, obviously, if they're doing Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, it's not going to be talking about Les Miserables. But this gives them the date, it gives them the title, it gives them the starring character, starring actor, it gives them the director, and they have already, in that same paragraph, mentioned the novel. And so by breaking it down into small pieces, it helps them along their way. When they have done all of those tiny pieces for the introduction, they again are given a chance to take their copyright information for the novel, the quote that they had, and their one sentence explaining why that quote is important, and turn it into the very first part of the introductory essay. The very first part of the introductory paragraph. So again, they're given an example that they can follow. And when it comes time for them to focus on the differences, it's broken up into small pieces for them, and they're given, again, an example of how they're supposed to format their paragraph that is looking at either similarities or differences in one particular aspect of the film and novel. Now, ultimately, if they followed all of these steps, they should get to a point of being able to take all of these little bits and pieces and turn it into a longer 5-paragraph essay. And so, as you saw earlier in the Prezi, there's the color coding to help them understand which parts are happening. I also color code the transition words and phrases for them because that's a very particular area of focus in English 098. And so, again, they're given an example that they can use as their model when they're writing their own essays. And so that's how I incorporate process and product modeling in my 098 class. We'll take a closer look. Where is it? So sorry. We'll take a closer look at product modeling in 098. Here is another example of a student sample for comparing and contrasting. And this is comparing and contrasting based on a prompt. So their prompt would be, for this particular sample, what are the similarities and differences between communicating by social media or communicating face-to-face? And so again, color coding, making sure that the thesis is yellow, making sure that the topic sentences are blue, making sure that the explanations of the topic sentences are bright pink, and the supporting details for each of those explanations are lighter pink. So it breaks it down and provides them with a student sample, a product that they can refer to as a guiding force. So the third important idea for incorporating universal design for learning is affective networks. Tomlinson and Imbo say when a student has a positive affect regarding learning and himself or herself as a learner, it opens the door to academic growth. And I've seen this firsthand as part of my master's thesis. I looked at the relationship between an improved reading level and a student's self-esteem, and found that there is indeed a direct correlation between the two. When a student is doing better academically, they feel better about themselves. So one of the ways that I tap into affective networks is by providing a choice of content. I mentioned that our novel at the beginning of the semester was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and we came to that conclusion by student choice. And an example of how I do that was how we selected our novel for the second part of the semester. So here we see that I break down the choices and offer book trailers. There are tons of book trailers available on YouTube. I highly recommend looking into them. You can actually have students make them. This first one was actually made by an ESL class, students in an ESL class in South Korea, animated by them, and it's phenomenal. So if you want to take a closer look at that, yeah, just A Long Walk to Water on YouTube is the book trailer. And so each book has a book trailer, and then when they finish viewing the book trailer, they go on to a Google form. They rank which one they would like to read, and then I tally up the votes, and whichever book gets the most votes is the one that we focus on. That's the first way that I am tapping into the affective network in my class. The second way is by providing feedback to the students. It is hugely important, I'm sure that you've seen, to give feedback to your students. And I give individualized feedback to support the student's needs, explicit feedback for a student to progress and about the student's progress. And I provide built-in structured peer feedback for my students. And this has had a huge impact on improving student essays. And so an example of how I incorporate that into English 098 is right here. So what we have here is an example of how I use Google Docs for student feedback. Because I'm able to see the student's work in real time as she's completing her essay, I can get in there right away and help catch her before she falls, shall we say. So students are given individual feedback based on their needs. They're given explicit feedback based on progress and what it is that needs to happen versus what it is that has happened. And it also provides an opportunity for structured peer feedback. So as you can see in the comments window, and because this student has completed her essay, all of the comments have been erased from the essay body itself, but we still have the record of every comment that has happened. So there are suggestions for how the student can expand her ideas and strengthen her points that she's making. And if the instruction isn't necessarily understood, I can give further feedback. This particular student has struggles with subject verb agreement, and so the first 3 that I find, I flag. After the 3rd one, I generally send a message to the student, okay, check your entire essay for this problem area. I want them to be able to be self-sufficient. I want them to know, okay, well, I struggle with subject-verb agreement, or I struggle with capitalization, so I need to be on the lookout for these problems in my writing. And then further down, we can see she is trying to transition between trying to transition from using first person to using third person in her writing to make it more formal. And so this suggestion was given to replace I recommend with just and then further down, we can see that one of her classmates used the PQP technique of positive and questioning, and then how to polish. And of course, I need to train the students. Well, what does it mean to polish your writing? Because as second language learners, they don't necessarily understand this concept. And so as a result, the peers also go in and help to identify problem areas as well. If my theory on that is that if they're able to find problem areas in their classmates' work, then they should be able to find those problem areas in their work as well. So by incorporating my own comments and their peer comments into the writing, it helps them to become stronger writers. So that would be how feedback is incorporated into English 098 to help students to improve. And so a final thought that I have is also from Grace Rubenstein, and she points out that if you give a classroom of students an array of different personalized tasks to do, they'll inevitably finish them at different times. So what do you do for the student who's sitting there twiddling their thumbs, or if you're dealing with middle schoolers, probably picking up stuff and throwing it at their classmates? What do you do with those students who are finishing quickly? The solution in my English 098 class is that I assign them specific missions to accomplish during idle time. And Rubenstein says you should do this so kids who finish first can always find something to do next. And an example of how I do this in my class is right here. So as I mentioned, we were working on a novel throughout the semester. And so every day, the students had specific activities that they needed to accomplish for the novel. going on to our class forum and responding to a specific chapter. They always needed to write a one-sentence summary on that particular chapter. And so if we look at, we'll actually look at this one. It's one of my favorite chapters. Mike TV sent by television. So they have a task to write a one-sentence summary of the chapter and then to have a response of some sort. Their responses are expected to be a minimum of 5 sentences. So they need to actually answer the question, but support their answer. Another thing that they can do if they find themselves with idle time is work on their Achieve 3000 for the day. Every day they have an article that is assigned to them on Achieve 3000, which is a great resource, especially for struggling readers, whether they're speaking English as a second language or not. And it is an adaptive program where the students are assessed to begin with, and their particular Lexile level is determined, and then I can assign one article for the entire class, but each student is looking at that article according to her Lexile level. So I might have a student who's reading in the 900s, and that article is going to be much longer than a student who's reading in the 500s. It also determines what amount of intervention is provided for the students. Perhaps they're given some background into the topic, or perhaps they're given, they're front-loaded with vocabulary. And so the students have a particular Achieve 3000 to accomplish on a daily basis. So if they find themselves finished with whatever task might be at hand and they're waiting for the next thing, they can move on to the homework and get the homework out of the way before becoming too idle, before becoming bored. And so that would be my reflection on universal design for learning in higher education. And my sources, as I mentioned, were Rubenstein and Tomlinson and Imbo. I hope that you have found this informative.